All right, the light says that we are recording, so that means this is officially episode 29 of the show that we call Both Laugh, the Dying Scene Quarantine Chat Show. I am beyond thrilled to have tonight's guest. For my money, one of the best voices in our little corner of the punk rock world, not to mention one of the best songwriters. That is Josh Caterer, who you probably know from Smoking Popes. Josh, thanks for coming on. This is really cool.
Hi. Thanks for that warm welcome. I appreciate the kind words.
You and I spoke once before over the phone back in the old days. I think it was right around when Into the Agony came out, actually.
Okay.
I was in the car in a Target parking lot in suburban Massachusetts at that point, so this feels better.
Yeah, now we can see each other.
Yeah.
My old days, I thought you were going to say it was the 90s, and I was going to tell you there's no way I have any memory of it.
No, it was quite literally just like 3 years ago.
Cool.
Yeah, so before the meat and potatoes of the conversation will be, for folks that don't know, you've got a live solo record coming out, which is a really interesting concept, and it's a great album. So we'll talk about that. But one of the reasons I started doing this show at first during quarantine was to talk to people that had plans during the year 2020 that either ended up falling by the wayside, had to cancel or postpone indefinitely, or that started doing sort of cool things to get by and to sort of pivot how they operate, because the world as we know it has changed for the foreseeable future. And so obviously we know that you were doing some pretty cool things towards later in COVID, but what was on the radar for you personally and for the Smoking Popes professionally? I know you guys had been pretty busy through and after Into the Agony coming out, but what did 2020 initially look like for you guys?
So the kind of touring cycle for Into the Agony was slowing down. So we didn't have extensive touring planned, but the thing that we had to cancel that really killed me was we were going to do some dates on the road with Jawbreaker.
Wow.
We're we toured with those guys back in the 90s, and
yeah, right.
So we're friends with them. So Adam had called me up and personally asked me if the Popes would go out with them for just a handful of shows, and we were beyond stoked to say yes to that, and unfortunately had to cancel. That was a bummer. And then there was this, what has become like an annual music festival that we started and do every year, every spring. Well, kind of, I think we do them in May. Did the last one in May, but it's called Live from the Rock Room Fest at the Bottom Lounge in Chicago. And we've done a couple of those so far. We were going to do the third annual one, and those events have just been so exhilarating to do, and we've just come to look forward to those with great anticipation, and we're so depressed to have to cancel that. And then we kind of do, we get offered random like festival shows and things, and then if we get one of those, this is kind of how the Popes operate, is that if we get one of those and it seems like it's worth doing, we'll book a show or two on the way out to it and back, and sort of turn it into a little week-long run of shows. And we kind of do a handful of those throughout the year, instead of like, let's book, 6 or 8 weeks worth of shows and just go for it. We do it a little more piecemeal.
Do you miss those days of booking 6 to 8 weeks and getting in a van and just going?
No.
Yeah. Nobody says yes to that question, by the way.
But I miss, the kind of rhythm of touring that we have ended up with and worked our way toward is something that I do miss a lot. I find that if you're on the road once you're out there for a couple of weeks, at least I start to feel kind of adrift and a little I start to go to dark places within after I've been on the road for like a few weeks or more. So, you know, I have found that about 2 weeks is the point at which it becomes unhealthy for me to be out there anymore. And then I need to go home and sort of re-plug into the things that provide some kind of foundation for me in life.
Sure. Yeah, I think as the older you get, especially, that is pretty much the most common answer when you talk to folks about touring now, especially if they toured a lot in the 90s or 2000s or whenever, is that 2 weeks seems to be about the limit now. And after that, things kind of get a little squirrely.
Yeah, I'm glad to know I'm not alone in that. It's a common human phenomenon.
Yeah, I was, how many shows was Jawbreaker planning on doing? I don't remember if they had officially announced it. I knew that I know of a couple of other people that had mentioned that they thought Jawbreaker was touring, but
They do, or they were doing something similar to the way that when we went out with the Descendants a couple years ago,
yeah.
we did like I think 4 shows with them, because they'll do like a run of 4 shows and then they'll fly home, and they do, you know, they would do a couple of those a month, and that seems, you know, a lot of bands, if you get to the point where you can approach it that way, it's a really good way to do it. And I think that's kind of what Jawbreaker's general approach was. You fly into a region and you do like 3 or 4 shows in that region, then you fly home. So that was what it was going to be, with like a few shows, maybe 4 shows. And they all would have been completely memorable experiences, but, you know, hopefully just postponed.
Yeah, those shows are a big deal. I mean, I think that most people, if they're watching this and they know Smoking Popes and they know Dying Season, they probably get how big a deal Jawbreaker was. But to have them call you personally and say, hey, do you want to come out and play some shows with us? That was the one band that, maybe aside from Fugazi, that most people thought, well, they're never going to get back together for the longest time, which they said as much for the longest time. So when they finally got back together, it still hasn't quite resonated with me.
So have you seen them since they've been back together?
I haven't, though. I think they did one Boston date, and it sold out essentially before it went on sale.
Yeah.
And I don't know enough people to be able to pull strings to try to shoot that show. I tried, don't get me wrong, but yeah, I wasn't able to finagle my way in.
Well, you know, assuming that shows open back up and we get to do that again, you know, they'll be playing again. I highly recommend going to see them, because I mean, they've always been just a great band, but they're better now. Like,
Yeah.
I really felt like in the, you know, in the ensuing like I think 25 years that they took off, their
Little break.
something happened there where like some kind of pent up energy or maturity or whatever, but like the way that they lock in now, and I've seen them twice. I saw their Riot Fest show, and then the time that we played with them at the Aragon in 2018. And both times there was just like a cohesiveness and a power to their live performance that wasn't there. And that's not to say that they weren't good back in the 90s, but there's definitely, it's like it's a richer experience to see.
Yeah.
They're definitely a band you should see live.
Yeah, and that makes me feel like they did it for the right reasons. You know, they got back together and started playing shows for the right reasons. They're not just phoning it in.
Right, because if it was just a paycheck, you'd be able to see that, like there would be kind of a vacancy to you know, some or all of them. But no, they're plugged into it and like loving it. You can tell there's this and I can even relate to that. I mean, the Popes took several years off and came back, and I remember that feeling of like, this is like I didn't even realize how much I missed this. Like
Yeah.
this is beautiful, you know. Like you get on stage and you're like, "Hello, old friend, I have missed
Yeah.
you," you know. So I think
And
that's how
even
we're
to
all gonna feel once we start playing shows again.
well, right. And even to a lesser extent, I mean, having Mike Fellamley back in the band, was that sort of another? Obviously, you had been reformed as a band with a few different drummers for
Yeah.
quite a while, but having him back in the band, I think we talked last time about even that in and of itself being like another kickstart. Like it was the 4 old guys back in the band together.
Yeah. And
Old guys being a probably not the best term to use.
I knew what you meant by that.
Right.
4 old friends.
The OG, yeah, the originals.
The originals. Yeah, that's definitely the case. And I mean, we've had nothing but great drummers in the band. I've loved playing with all of them, and they've all brought something awesome to the table. But you know, if you change drummers, it changes the personality of your band. It sort of changes the musical voice of the band, you know, like the thing which is like the that's greater than the sum of its parts. It's like what the identity of the collective is of the band. And you know, you just there was something about that moment. We hadn't played music with Mike for years, and then you know the 3 of us went over to his house, and he had like a practice space set up in his basement. We brought our gear, set it up, and as soon as we launch into the first song, we get like into the first verse of it, and like the rest of us just look at each other, and there it was just with our eyes, we were just saying to each other like, we're back.
Yeah.
Like we haven't really been the Smoking Popes for several years. We've been like a version of, like, as close to the Smoking Popes as you could get is what we were for several years. And it reminds me of a quote that I heard from Iggy Pop in an interview where because you know for years and years he was playing with like a pickup band, you know. But once he got back with the Ashton brothers and started playing with them, the quote was something like, as soon as I started playing with the Ashton brothers again, I realized that I had been performing in a Stooges cover band for the last 30 years. And I could sort of relate to that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We were the world's greatest Smoking Popes cover band until we got Mike back in the band.
Yeah, I think that people that maybe are not necessarily musically inclined, that might like the music, but that aren't musicians, don't necessarily understand what it means to plug a drummer into a band. For most bands, the drummer is not the biggest personality. I guess maybe you could argue nowadays in Blink 182, but for most bands, the drummer isn't the thing that you notice the most. Except that I think if you're a musician, plugging a drummer in is a huge deal. I think
any musician would understand that.
Yeah.
The extent to which a drummer can define the tone of a band is they're arguably the most important member of the band when it comes to like, what is that musical voice? What is the feel, the real vibe of the music going to be?
I remember having a few lengthy conversations with a couple of the Bouncing Souls guys after they added George from Hot Water Music, who was their first choice to replace Mike, their old drummer. And then sort of George realizing that George is a phenomenal drummer, but George didn't play Bouncing Souls kind of music. So him having to go through this whole thing about, do I try to change songs to make them the way that I play drums, or do I try to play the Bouncing Soul and sort of relearn how to play my instrument? And he has said that there's some songs that just like, that's the way they go now, because that's the way I'm going to play them. But then he has tried to tailor his playing to a Bouncing Soul sound. And I don't know that people necessarily think along those terms if you are Joe Q Public that is a music fan. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. You're probably right. But still, a listener or an audience member at a show, whether they know the reason for it or not, they'll be able to pick up on,
Sure.
you know, if the band is, you know, really good or just okay, or
Missing something, or yeah.
something, you know, they might not be able to identify the thing that makes a performance great, or a performance feel inspired. But it could be something that, you know, like that, like the presence of the way the drummer is playing is making all the other musicians feel like we're locked in. And you know, there's a lot of interesting dynamics. Like I think about that with you know, as a film lover, I like to, like, you know, watch like special features on DVDs and things, or making of documentaries, and or listen to podcasts about, you know, things that kind of open the curtain on like what's going on behind the scenes. And you discover that you know, there are so many moving parts, and it's such a collaborative thing, and a band is really like that. These little things that different people that are involved can bring to it, that become essential parts of that thing. But you know, people just, a lot of people go to a movie, and you're just like, oh, that's a good movie, or it's, I liked it or I didn't like it, and then you don't necessarily analyze it. But this is the curse of the artistic creative people, is that you relentlessly pick apart everything that you're seeing. And I don't know.
With movies, I'm able to just turn that part of my brain off, suspend disbelief. Like I know what I like in a movie, and that's cool. With music, I could incessantly watch nothing but music documentaries all the time about making of albums I've never heard before or don't care about necessarily, but just to know what went into the making of an album, a Paul Simon album. I get Paul Simon, I'm not a huge fan, but there was a great documentary on PBS not too long ago about the making of the Graceland album, or the 25th anniversary of the Graceland album. And I think I've seen it twice now, because it's just fascinating, the minutia behind how to make an album and what you're putting into, especially an album like that. I could watch that. I could watch exclusively that.
Where can I find that?
I know it was on PBS. So I think it was, I don't know who actually made it. I think it's part of a series where they go, it's like behind the album, basically. I think they've done one or two on like an old Nirvana album. I think maybe Damn the Torpedoes, there was one on. I believe that they were filmed, God, they're not recent, but they have aired recently on PBS, sort of late at night. But I'll try to look up where I saw them.
I remember years ago, I heard part of an interview with Paul Simon. Might have been on Fresh Air or something. He was on Fresh Air, and he was talking about the Graceland record, and he was talking about how the success of that record, because he had used like African vocalists and musicians on there, and it sort of helped foster the popularity of what came to be known as world music.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how that kind of success, and then the world music thing, tied into bringing some attention to the apartheid situation over there, and drawing like global attention to that. And he's talking about this, and then he stops and he goes, I'm sorry, I know it sounds kind of self-aggrandizing for me to be talking about this, but it's just my honest observation about what happened when that album came out. I just thought that was so awesome.
Right.
Because I'm like, yeah, what do you do when you're Paul Simon?
Right.
When like those things actually happen, you release an album and it has like an impact on the entire world.
Right.
Like, are you allowed to sit around and talk about that? Or do you have to let everybody else talk about how important?
Right. Hey, God bless him for actually talking about it.
And for acknowledging that it was kind of weird for him to be talking about.
Yeah, right.
like he seems like about as down to earth as you can be if you're Paul Simon.
Yeah, right. My daughter referenced Paul Simon. It did. My daughter's 13, and their music artist of the day for music class was Simon and Garfunkel. So she was talking about Simon and Garfunkel at dinner, and it's just a weird, like, she has never talked about music like that before. And she actually referenced, I said that I was more of a fan of Paul Simon's solo career than Simon and Garfunkel. And she said, what about the music he did with, was it Ladysmith Black Mambaza? And she had that like at her fingertips. I said, wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea. Like, because he's not on TikTok, so I had no idea.
No, he's not. I share your opinion though. I like his solo stuff better, and that's not to say that I don't like Simon and Garfunkel. It's obviously brilliant stuff. It's just pretty moody. Like
Yeah.
you really have to be. It has to be raining outside. So
Yeah, right.
On a Simon and Garfunkel record.
Right.
But you know, and even like he keeps making albums, and like
Right.
his recent stuff over the last couple of decades, like there's always very interesting moments, and like you can see that he's really engaged in the songwriting process as much as ever. He'll still just have like a brilliant take on the lyrics of a song, and he seems to be inspired still, which is inspiring to me. I love any artist who keeps going, you know, well into their later years. Like it just I find that somehow comforting, you know, because there are points where you worry, like, you know, once you hit 40,
Yeah.
you know, you start wrestling with like, oh, am I relevant anymore?
Yeah.
And it's just comforting to see that a guy like Paul Simon isn't sitting there worrying about whether he's relevant or not.
Yeah, right.
Trying to write the best, most interesting and inspired songs he possibly can.
And I'm sure,
and then maybe, you know, maybe his stuff isn't going to #1 on the charts anymore, but like, who cares?
Right.
You know,
Paul Simon fans are going to buy Paul Simon albums.
Right. And he's creating things that you know, you make an album, it's out there in the world, and people, it can have whatever effect on other humans that it needs to have, you know, and that's sort of why we're doing this.
Right. So I guess talking about music, good segue to, let's talk about the Hideout sessions. So I guess first and foremost, for folks that don't know, it's a live solo album that you recorded at essentially an empty bar in Chicago.
Yeah.
To boil it down to its core elements. But if you can, I've read a little bit about the Hideout. I have never been to Chicago, so I don't know it personally.
Oh.
But if you can sort of at first explain sort of the Hideout and what it is, it's got a cool history or backstory to it.
It does. I don't know the whole backstory to it. I just know that I love seeing shows there, and I've played a few shows there that I have loved. And there is something especially intimate about the vibe in the Hideout. It's sort of I don't know what their capacity, I would guess maybe like 150 capacity room. So it's kind of just the dimensions of the room are such that you feel pretty close to anybody that's in the room if crowd in there. And it's lit in kind of a fun, warm way with all these like Christmas lights on the ceiling. So it's just very I don't know. It's the kind of place that you kind of fall in love with.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people in Chicago have that kind of relationship with the Hideout. So it seemed like a good place to do this. Also, because as soon as everything shut down last year from COVID, the Hideout is a club that pretty quickly adapted to that situation and started to develop an online presence of virtual performances. They figured out just how to you know, present that on their website and to do it safely. I mean, when we ended up playing there, you know, they took our temperatures coming in, and we're very careful to keep everybody away from each other in there so that we were safe. And but they quickly sort of seemed to, you know, set the example in Chicago of like, okay, if we're switching to an online thing now, here's kind of how you do it. And they started to have regular shows, and I just was like, that's so cool. I want to do one of those.
Yeah.
But it also occurred to me that it would be a good opportunity, since, you know, everything that the Popes had scheduled got canceled, and it's these days it's a little harder to get the Popes all together because you know, our drummer moved out of state, and so it's just not easy to get everybody in the same place and work on anything or practice anything these days. I decided, well, why don't I'll just make it a solo thing, and maybe it would give me an opportunity to play with some musicians who I don't normally get to play with.
Yeah.
And then I thought of these couple of guys who I've known for years and whose work I admire, but I've never actually played in a band with either of these guys. There's John Perrin, who plays drums for NRBQ, but he also played in a band called the Love Shots that the Popes had played with a few times. And then I thought for bass guitar, I would ask John San Juan, who plays in the Hushdrops and does some solo stuff. And he usually, you know, sort of functions as a singer, guitar player, and he's brilliant at both of those things. But I knew he was a multi-instrumentalist and could play anything.
Yeah.
Well, I asked him to do bass on this, and we also hadn't played together before. So we had to.
Those two had never played together with each other before.
Together once in a Beatles cover band.
Okay.
Just for one set, and they
That's
told
funny.
me that they didn't even rehearse for that set. They both had to just get on stage, and they both have an extensive knowledge of Beatles songs, so they just picked up instruments. It was a plug and play situation. But
That's
they
great.
had made music together that once. But they sound like they've been playing together for decades. There's just this kind of synergy to their playing where they really locked in together and really brought a lot of creativity and inspiration to the arrangements of these songs. And so there was, for this album, there was a few ideas that were all coming together at once. One was I wanted to play at the Hideout. Two is I wanted to play with these two guys.
Yeah.
And three is that I wanted to continue to explore this idea that the Popes had started exploring back in whatever year it was when we did the album The Party's Over, which was it's an album of covers, but mostly covers from the kind of Frank Sinatra, Judy Garland era of songwriting.
Sure.
We wanted to kind of reinterpret those songs with our own style, and because you know, I've always been kind of in love with the idea of being interpreters of songs, you know, because like some of my favorite music is music that is made by people who didn't write it, you know, like I'm a huge Frank Sinatra fan. He never wrote his own songs, you know, he was interpreting, and all these great artists of that era, you know, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr.,
Elvis.
Elvis too.
Yeah.
Like I was thinking more of the slightly earlier like crooner era,
Yeah.
Nat King Cole and people like that. Like they're not writing their own songs, but they're bringing so much personality to what they're doing that they make the song their own, even if it's something that's, you know, you can think of 10 versions of that song that other people have done. When Nat King Cole does it, like it's his.
Yeah, right.
And so I thought, well, that was the inspiration behind The Party's Over. But I thought, like, there's there's so much great music from that era. You could make many albums of that kind of stuff. So I wanted to continue to do that. So the content of this album is, I mean, there's 10 songs on the album. 6 of them are reinterpreted versions of old cover songs, like we do My Funny Valentine and I Only Have Eyes for You and What Kind of Fool Am I? Like these songs that were standards back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And then the other 4 songs on the album are reinterpreted versions of Smoking Pope songs, because I thought it would be cool to kind of take some of songs that I had written and treat them like cover songs, and it might show the continuity between the songs that inspired my songwriting and the songs that I actually wrote out of it. Like for example, we do a version of Need You Around on the album that's totally different and brings out a different component from the song. But we also do the song What Kind of Fool Am I is sort of like, I would say that Need You Around is loosely based on the song What Kind of Fool Am I. The melody of it is if you compare the 2 melodies, you'll see that Need You Around sort of feels like a modern version of What Kind of Fool Am I.
Interesting.
And so I wanted to have both those songs on the album so that you could see that they live in the same neighborhood.
I got the sense in listening to it that in some ways the songs that are the traditional covers, they almost sound more like Smoking Pope songs than the Smoking Pope songs that you reimagined, because the Smoking Pope songs, again, most people haven't heard it yet, they're played slower. There might be a different key involved in like Megan, and they don't sound like Smoking Pope songs, but the other 6 kind of like, it makes a little more sense that way. So that's a really interesting way to put the album together, or to sort of conceptualize.
I was kind of hoping that for people that like the Smoking Popes, it would, as you said, contextualize it. It would put our body of work in the context of the music that it was always kind of striving to be.
Yeah.
So
and there's a thing that if you're a fan of mid 90s punk rock, then you're certainly not is not foreign to you that punk rock bands did a lot of covers of older songs, whether it was 80s songs or 60s songs or whatever. But you do them differently. That some of them are just sort of boilerplate 90s punk rock beat, but will reinterpret an Adamant song or whatever from the 80s, right? But you sort of do them differently. There, maybe it's a musicianship level thing, but you sort of do them differently so they don't sound like they're pop punk songs, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like you give them the real, I think, interpretation that they deserve, frankly.
Thanks. I'm so happy with the way the album has turned out. I'm proud of all the stuff that Popes have done and other projects I've been involved in. I'm not trying to denigrate any of my own material, but I would say that this particular album is like very dear to my heart. I feel like it's almost the culmination of different like musical avenues that were being explored. They sort of come together on this project, and the guys that I'm playing with are so musically literate and inspired by such a variety of styles. I think that they together they have like the power of a pop punk trio, but they also have the diversity of like a jazz combo.
Yeah.
There's something a little bit jazzy about the exploratory nature of their playing, and it's just exciting for me to play with them, and I think that excitement comes through in the record. So I'm glad you like it.
That John Perrin knows his way around a drum kit. He
certainly does.
Yeah, he I know of NRBQ. I'm certainly not well versed in the NRBQ catalog, but That guy can play the drums.
Really can. It's inspiring to play with him.
I think one of my favorite moments on the album is during is that I Only Have Eyes for You. There's his drums are just sort of otherworldly in that song. And then there's a few I mentioned before that I think you're one of my favorite voices in punk rock, but for those that don't know, Josh Caterer knows his way around a guitar.
Oh,
There's a few solos in that song
thanks.
that people might not necessarily expect coming from from Josh Caterer, if that makes sense.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I don't know if people who are really fans of the genre of like 90s pop punk, I don't know if in general they love guitar solos. So
There haven't been many of them.
I've always been a little self-conscious about the amount of guitar soloing that the Popes do, and I can't tell if half our audience is just sort of politely enduring the solos to get to the other parts, but we go ahead and solo anyway. But this is a project where everybody kind of stretches out, and it feels more, if I keep describing it as jazz too much, it's going to give people the wrong.
No, it is not a jazz record, folks.
It's not a jazz record at all, but
No.
I do feel like the kind of improv and kind of showmanship that everybody is displaying on their instruments and all that feels a little bit like jazzy to me, in the sense that it's like musicians who are really into the craft of what they're doing and are excited about seeing what they can bring to all these little moments in the song. When you listen to jazz music, if it's good, you'll hear like all these guys they're all plugged into the whole, and so they're serving the overall song, but they're also like always like sprinkling some Mrs. Dash on like every moment of the song,
Right.
And I feel like John and John are doing that constantly in very tasteful ways throughout this whole project, and I love it.
How much rehearsal time did you guys have? Because you went into this concept knowing not just that you were going to play a show, but that you were going to record a live album, correct? Like that was sort of the point, which is that
was the plan from the beginning.
Which is a high bar for a band that's never played together before.
Yeah. And man, I forget what the number is of days that we had. From the time that we had our first rehearsal, it was like 40 something days from the time of our first rehearsal to the time of the recording. And we pretty much practiced once a week. I think towards the end we might have done twice a week, but like it was a pretty concentrated amount of time, basically a month and a half. And the first few sessions were trying to see what songs we wanted to do, and I would show up with different ideas. Actually, I made demos just on my phone of myself playing acoustic guitar through these songs, sent them to the guys, and then we would show up and just try to plow through them and see how they felt. Because sometimes you get an idea about what's going to work, but until you try it with the band, you don't know. So there was a couple of songs that I was convinced were going to be great, but we just could not find an arrangement that felt like it totally clicked. And so I don't know, we might keep working on those and save them for the next project, but we had to whittle through, like you play something a few different ways, you can land on a good solid arrangement, like all right, that one's in. And then we spent probably the first 2 or 3 rehearsals just doing that, and from there just playing through them and tightening them up, and you going through this process of like learning the arrangement to the point where you don't have to think about the arrangement anymore, because you know where the song is going, and now you can live in it and try to inhabit those moments and sprinkle that seasoning on all the different parts of it. But it takes a while to get there. But we
So
did, once we had the date, I think we started our first rehearsal, and then within a week after that, I think I had locked in the date at the Hideout, and it turned out it's like 40 some days away, and
yeah.
everybody was like, "Wow, okay, we've got 40 days here to like, it's like sort of like a couch to marathon situation."
Yeah, right.
So that was pretty exhilarating.
In the demos that you gave them, did you sort of indicate to them like what kind of an arrangement or what kind of a feel you wanted for each song, or did a lot of that come out of just being together?
I did, but like that changed once I started playing with them. My original thought for it was that the whole project was going to be fairly mellow. It was going to have just sort of a lighter touch to it. But like, as from the first rehearsal, everybody was just digging in harder, and that felt right. It was just obvious that's the way that this combo of musicians is best able to express themselves, is with more energy. So I just had to adjust my expectations.
Wanting to keep it lighter, is that sort of by design to sort of keep it away from being, I don't want to say too much of a Pope's clone because it's not a Pope's album, but if an album is too aggressive, then maybe it takes on the same feel for people. Is that why you kind of wanted to have a different tone to it? Or?
Yeah, I guess I didn't, I just knew that I didn't want it to be, I didn't want it to be Popesy in its arrangements, because if I was going to be Popesy in the arrangements, I'll just play with Pope. I mean,
yeah, right.
this by definition had to be something else.
Right.
But I think my idea that it was going to be lighter might have been based on my guess as to what these guys were going to bring to the table. I had, seen them playing different kinds of music, and like John with NRBQ. They're not a really aggressive hard rock band.
Right.
And I had seen him play also with a band around town called the Western Elstons, which is like kind of a swing country band where he was playing kind of light.
Yeah.
So I just thought, well, maybe that's how this is going to go. So that was my guess.
Yeah.
But then once we got into it, everybody was just ready to rock. And so I was like, all right, let's just go for it then and rock.
So can you describe the experience then in recording a live album in front of nobody? Especially because it's an energetic album. Like I mentioned, I Only Have Eyes for You. That song kind of finishes big. And like I said, there's a lot of guitar work going on and the drums are big. And then it's like the song's over and then it's crickets, where that would normally be a thing where you're kind of, I'm assuming, building off the energy you get from the crowd and vice versa. And then you kind of build up to this big crescendo, and then it's okay, on to What Kind of Fool Am I?
Yeah. Yeah. It was important to get over that pretty quickly. Any need for an audience response, because you really weren't going to get it.
Right.
But I think, I think I speak for all three of us when I say that, like, we went into this thinking of it more in terms of making a record than in terms of playing a show. Like yes, we were presenting it as a virtual show that people could watch, but we were thinking of it more as people are going to watch us make a record.
Okay.
So even though there was a little bit of like, kind of expressing ourselves the way that we would at a show, moving around a little bit, but there was less of that, at least for me. If I was playing a show to an audience, I I wouldn't be as concerned about playing every note correctly. I would be more concerned about sort of connecting with the people that were in front of me and having like kind of this exchange of energy that happens. And you give myself a margin to play a certain number of erroneous notes during a song. But for this, I was like, no, I got to play this right.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to have to go back in and punch in anything in the studio. I want it to all be legit, like one complete take without any fixes. So I was a little more inhibited. And I look back at the video, and I think it looks great as far as the way the camera work was, and you know, we put suits on. So I was like, oh, I kind of like that aspect of it. Makes us look a little more like we're trying. But I also am noticing that my physical posture, I think, is a little more contained than it would be during a normal performance. And even, you know, I assume that the day will come when this trio of musicians will play live shows in front of an audience and play that material. And I think that our physical performance, or at least mine, will be different. It will be more expressive and less, you know, contained.
Because, I mean, you've recorded, it's my understanding, at least the Popes have recorded live, at least in the studio. You may not necessarily record vocals or whatever all at the same time, but you can at least record the music together. But trying to do vocals on top of that is a different animal. Yeah,
you always overdub the vocals later, and you overdub the guitar solos later. Yeah. So to have to do those things in one take and have it all come together, we felt the pressure of that. I certainly felt the pressure of that. Mm-hmm. So it was exhilarating, you know, the whole thing. It was like we walked in there going, why did we do this to ourselves? You know, why didn't we could book studio time and just go in and make a record. We're not feeling any of this pressure. But like, part of the reason why we did it that way, and there was a handful of reasons, but one of them is that we wanted to, when we made that record, I hadn't yet figured out what label was going to put it out. So we basically had to fund the recording ourselves. So it like, you know, it was a way to, if we go into a club, like we don't have to pay for studio time. And if we make some money off of the virtual show, the ticket sales for that, you know, that'll help pay for the mixing of the album. So that was the idea there, but it also served the purpose of turning the album into this cool event. Like there's a story kind of associated with the making of the album that I wouldn't trade for anything now. Yeah, I mean, I want to do another one.
Really? That's cool.
I kind of want to combine it when this album comes out, which is going to be in late March. Sometime after that, maybe in April, I want to do like a release show.
Yeah.
That we also record and turn into another one of these albums. I think we've got at least one more full-length album of this kind of material to go.
That's an interesting idea, to record your album release show, but not to play the album that your album releasing, to record an entire another show. That's great.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm working on it.
There's a lot of other bands, obviously, that have had to pivot to doing live streams, and that's kind of the thing now, and that's good. And there's some that I know that have put out live albums that came from material recorded at their live streams or whatever, but not anybody that I know of otherwise that went into their live stream say, this is our 10-song set, we're going to turn this into an album. I don't know of anybody else that's done it that way.
Yeah, I don't know of anybody either.
It came out really great. Now you can definitely tell. It is a little jarring sometimes to know that it's a live album and to expect the crowd noise afterwards, after a solo or even after a song, the sort of compulsory.
Actually, I mean, I can think of an example of it that I thought of even last summer when we were dreaming this idea up. I remembered this album that Joe Jackson put out. in the late 80s called Big World,
Okay.
which he recorded. I can't remember the venue, but I know he recorded it at a club in New York City. And he allowed a kind of a limited audience in there. Because I remember reading an article about it, and people could come in, but there were like cards on the tables that told you that you had to remain absolutely silent, and you not only couldn't you clap after the songs, but there was no coughing or talking or anything. You just had to remain completely silent. And so then, so he recorded that album on stage, and the songs on that album are, each song is one complete take, but he would do multiple takes of the song. He got one that
That's
was
not fair.
just right. But still, what you're hearing is a complete take of a song that was performed on stage in a club with some people in the room. But so I think from his point of view and from his band's point of view, it gave them that energized kind of like semi-live feel. But since there's no crowd noise, you get the clarity in the recording that is more enjoyable to listen to. I like, let's be honest, like live albums are not the best
to
listen to. I mean, there's a couple exceptions to that, Cheap Trick at Budokan, and a couple other ones are like really good, but you'd really rather be listening to a studio album because it just sounds better.
And particularly on vinyl too, I will say. Like I have a fairly extensive vinyl collection, and I might have 2 live albums, and I probably don't even listen to them because a lot of times they're triple albums or quadruple albums, and who's got the time for that, really?
Right.
Like
Exactly.
Really, I don't have time to sit down and listen to 2 songs and flip it over and listen to 2 songs and flip it over. Like, no thanks. Digitally maybe,
Much work.
Yeah, exactly. So this is nice. 10 songs. It's short and sweet. Although now that I think about it, the Joe Jackson thing, that's got to be a little jarring for the musicians too, because they're playing in a room full of people. So you expect that there's going to be some audience feedback, and then to have nothing, that's almost got to do something else to you mentally while you're performing. It's one thing to perform in a club with few people in it. That's kind of how punk rock people cut their teeth, right? But to perform in a room full of people that have to maintain silence, it's like being at the DMV, for goodness sake.
Right, but I don't know. I also think what a special experience for the people that got to be there.
Sure.
When that album comes out and you're listening to the finished product and you're like, you can't hear me, but I was in the room.
Yeah.
And instead of having to just imagine, anytime you listen to an album, like you sort of imagine what that world would have been like to be in it, but that those people get to say, no, I know exactly what it felt like in the room when that album was made.
Right.
It's kind of cool.
Album's out when? March 26th. Do I have that right? 26th.
Yeah. The first single I think is coming out in early March, like March 5th or something.
Okay.
We're releasing the video from the live stream for the song Need You Around. And so that'll be March 5th, but the full album comes on the 26th.
That's an interesting choice because obviously it's probably the song that people know the best from you, and it doesn't sound anything like they are expecting. So if they didn't see the live stream, and I'm one of those people who didn't, it was on my wife's birthday, so I couldn't really do that. But if they weren't there for the live stream, then it's going to be an interesting it's an interesting feel for them. So that's a good song to lead with, I think.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, it seemed like it was gonna. I traditionally have been really bad at picking singles for songs. I mean, for off of albums, and "Need You Around" wouldn't have been my choice for the album "Born to Quit."
Mm.
I wanted to go with like Rubella.
Yeah,
it just seemed like "Need You Around" was an odd choice because it starts with drums and then there's instrumental. The singing doesn't even start until you're into the song for over a minute before there's any singing, and there's not really a chorus.
Right.
And but that single was chosen for us because Q101 just started playing it. They heard the record and picked that song and just put it in heavy rotation. And it turned out to be the right choice.
Yeah,
Apparently.
right.
It did fairly well, but I just decided, and then, you know, subsequently, whenever I try to identify what the single off an album is going to be, like, I'm just wrong. I'm just wrong about it. So in this case, it just seemed like my gut was telling me to pick, you know, something like "I Only Have Eyes for You," or, you know, one of the covers, like "What Kind of Fool Am I?" Just like, I don't know, that's one of my favorite ones on the record. I love the vibe of that song.
Yeah.
But then I just decided, why don't I trust the program director from Q101 to pick the single off of this album, like he did off of that album back in 1995.
Right.
And we'll just go with that.
Right.
Since it worked the first time, maybe it'll work again.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. Thanks for doing this. I don't want to take up too much of your evening, and we're at close to an hour now, so I'm trying to be mindful of that. But thanks for doing this. It's a great album. It's out March 26th on Pravda Records. Do I have that right?
Yes, Pravda.
Yeah, people should pick it up. It's really cool.
Thanks.
Whether or not you're a Popes fan, it's a really cool album.
I appreciate your enthusiasm about it, and thanks. I've enjoyed talking to you. Like, this, you know, it's been a good interview.
And as a wannabe guitar nerd, I love your Coronado too. That's one of my favorite guitars to see somebody play. And I've gotten to take pictures of you playing it a few times. It's like nobody plays a Coronado. Nobody in punk rock plays a Coronado, and it just has such a cool sound.
Somewhere I saw there's a picture of Elvis with a Coronado, the same kind of sunburst Coronado, and he's holding it up. He like played it in one of his movies.
I think, yeah, that sounds right. And I don't think he put it down for the whole movie because he never knew what to do with his hands. So,
right. But yeah, I bought that guitar. I started maybe 5 or 6 years ago playing with a blues band called the Mud Band, and we put out an album together, and it was sort of a fun side project kind of a thing where I was able to explore that. But that's when I decided, well, I've got to get a sort of bluesier looking guitar.
Yeah.
You know? So I started looking at like semi hollow body guitars and, you know, kind of BB King-esque kind of guitars, but I played a bunch of them. But then when I stumbled across the Coronado, it was more Elvis than it was BB King, but I just loved the way it played. And then I fell in love with the guitar so much, I started using it as my Pope's guitar, and it has become my instrument.
Yeah, no,
unexpectedly. I thought it would be this little novelty I had on the side, but it has become my main instrument. And you know, you have to be one with your axe.
Right. But I think if you can find a Coronado that you're not fighting against because of the hollow nature of it, then it's the one. So.
Oh yeah. It's a very solid guitar. It stays in tune incredibly well.
Interesting.
You know, it's not a delicate instrument. It's like big and heavy, and you can beat on it and it'll stay in tune.
Yeah. Do you find yourself having to fight? Is it a full hollow or is it semi hollow? I think the early Coronados were full hollow.
Yeah, no.
And then I think they started to make them like center block or whatever.
It's got a center block in it, so it doesn't squeal too much.
Yeah. I love it, and every time I get to see pictures of it, even it's like, ooh, that's a pretty guitar.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it, and hopefully 2021 is the year we get to see you back out on the road. Who knows? I've been vaccinated, so I'm just sitting waiting. I'm like, oh, come on, I work in healthcare by day. So I'm lucky enough to have been fully vaccinated at this point. I'm like, all right, I can be first. I can be in the photo pit of the shows. Let's go.
Nice.
I know.
I was naturally vaccinated because I had COVID a couple months ago.
How did that experience go for you? Did it?
An entirely miserable experience.
Really?
Yeah. And it was, there were moments, particularly during the second week, where I thought I should go to the hospital because I had this fever that was up in the 103.5 area, and I just couldn't get it to come down. I was just
Yeah.
taking Tylenol and stuff, and it just wouldn't come down. And I got a little worried.
Yeah.
I just felt like I had been hit by a truck, like body aches, every joint in my body just aching, headache, my sinuses were killing me, nauseous, exhausted, fever chills, like just all of it, just terrible. And but I have a friend in a band called the Boll Weevils.
Dr. Daryl was on an earlier version of this show.
Dr. Daryl.
Yeah.
And you know, he's an ER doctor. And so when my fever got up there and I got worried, I texted Daryl and I was like, man, what should I do? Am I supposed to go in? And he kind of like gave me some direction as to you know, different over-the-counter things that I could try that would help me, that turned out to be very helpful besides what I was taking. But he also he put my mind at ease right off the bat, because I said, should I go into the hospital? And he said, well, how's your breathing? Like, he asked if I was experiencing air hunger, which is sort of a terrifying term, but I knew what he meant by that.
Yeah. Right.
And I said, no. I mean, I have a little bit of a cough if I try to breathe deeply, but other than that, I'm no air hunger. So he's like, well, you don't have to go in then, because like that's what you would go in for.
Mhm.
The fever, he's like, the fever can be hard to control, but that's just part of the deal. I would only go in if you're really having trouble breathing. But like, here's some other stuff we can try to get that fever down and get you feeling better. And, you know, he said, just take Dramamine for the nausea. And I'm like, oh yeah, Dramamine.
Oh yeah.
I guess
Right.
and it worked. You know,
Yeah.
I have not actually ever taken Dramamine before, but it helped. And then I could actually eat a little bit because I didn't eat for a few days there.
How long were you out of commission for?
I know they said it was like, you're supposed to be from the day of the diagnosis until it's supposed to be like 10 days.
Yeah.
But that was only the case if you've been fever free for 24 hours. But when I got to the 10th day, I still had a bit of a fever. I was up at like, 100. So it took me another couple of days. I think it was like day 12 I could actually come out of quarantine.
Wow.
Yeah, it was no fun, man. But
How do you feel now? I mean, how long did it take even after that to have the sort of post-acute stuff before that went away?
yeah, couple of lingering symptoms. Most of the body aches went away, but now I have like pain in my hips that I never had before.
Interesting.
Just like constantly, that has persisted ever since. I just have like hip issues now.
Huh.
Which is a little weird.
That's a weird side effect. Yeah.
Yeah. And then for like a good 2 or 3 weeks after I was out of quarantine, I felt really weird emotionally and mentally. Like, people talk about there being like a brain fog.
Yeah.
There was a brain fog. Like, it was a little harder for me to finish sentences and things, but also like emotionally, I was like a raw nerve. Like, I would cry a lot.
Mm.
And I'm not usually like a big crier.
Yeah.
But like, I was almost every day, something would bring me to tears. I was just like in a really weird place emotionally. And it took me weeks to get back to where I felt grounded.
Wow.
I've seen articles about that where people, months after COVID, they're having like anxiety and depression disorders that they never had before that they have to deal with. So like, we still don't know the extent of long-term effects of this strange disease,
Right.
because it affects your brain. That's what turns off your taste and smell, is like
Right.
it gets to your actual brain and messes
Right.
with you. So that's scary.
Yeah, that part is horrifying to me. As I mean, as somebody who has had lung issues since I was 10 anyway, that part of it, like I had the lingering anxiety from it, but knowing the other, especially the sort of brain stuff that made me ultra paranoid of putting myself near it. Not
Yeah.
to the extent that I never left my house, but it was pretty much just grocery store and work.
So what happens with the vaccine? Did you have any like mild side effects from that?
First shot, I got the Moderna one. First shot was a piece of cake. It felt even, I get the flu shot every year, and it wasn't even as bad as a flu shot, and even in terms of arm pain. The second one, about 11 hours after I got it, so essentially the middle of the night, I started with the shakes, like cold sweats and shakes, and then I was super hot. I never really had a fever. I mean, they don't consider 99 a fever. It was like elevated temperature a little bit, but for a good 24 hours, it was just alternating between hot sweats, cold sweats, and body aches. Like my back hurt, my hips hurt, my knees hurt. And then I went to sleep that night. I woke up fine the following day. So it was quite literally 24 hours, starting about 12 hours after I got it.
Yeah, man. It
That was
sounds,
good.
sounds like what you experienced was like a very micro version of
Yeah.
what it feels like to have COVID.
Yeah.
Because like the first week after I tested positive wasn't that bad. Like 5 days into it, I was like, this is nothing. I
Yeah.
got a mild case, and then it really kicked in the second week, and it was like for about 5 days in a row, I was just like, ah, I was like, I don't know if I've ever been this miserable
Yeah.
in my life. But then coming out of that, the sort of glass half full thing that I will say is that I felt like, well, I've got some antibodies now, so I
Right.
mean, I'm still going to mask up and stay away from people, but that underlying fear has kind of gone away that I'm going to catch it, at least for the next few months.
Right.
There's different information you see about how long the immunity lasts, but I was like, I've probably got a few months here where I don't have to worry.
Yeah. And I don't think they'll even vaccinate you until 60 or 90 days after the end of your COVID experience.
Yeah.
So,
So that was I'm coming up, like maybe next month, I think I would be eligible.
well, I'm glad you're feeling better. I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad
Thanks.
we're able to talk for this. This is, like I said, you've long been one of my favorite voices and songwriters and guitar people. So this is a cool experience for me. Thank you
so
for,
much, man. I appreciate it. And, let's do this again when the next album comes out.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'll probably, if I have time to edit things tonight, I'll probably post it tomorrow. If not, I'll probably post it on the other side of the weekend and
Cool.
help keep up press for the album because it's cool.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this. I will stop recording and then we are